credit risk to the banks, so their credit requirements are stiffer. So it isn't available to everybody. The interest rate is usually lower, but they don't make it available to everybody. Like a first-time car buyer will not lease. Somebody who doesn't own a home or has moved frequently in the last 2 or 5 years probably won't get approved.
Then one could almost think that being able to lease a car is sort of a status thing, is that right?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. David, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Later, our car buying consultant will tell us the best way to negotiate a lease. But first, remember when you bought your first car? Well, when the Car Care Clinic returns, we'll tell you how to help your teenagers choose their first cars. That's all coming up, so don't go away. Buying and caring for a new car means a whole new world of responsibility for your teen. Right now, here's Lucille to tell you how to make your teen's first purchase count.
I think this is probably one of the most important things that happens to a teenager, that first car. It's going to teach him a lot of things. It'll teach him to respect equipment because he knows that if he takes care of this, it's going to last, and what happens if you don't. It'll teach him responsibility and really see cause and effect. What happens when you skid tires and ruin them? You have to buy new. When you drive like a cowboy, you buy more gas. It's a first good lesson on cars. But the big thing about buying that first car, I think it should be a love affair. Unless you can really get into this car and be proud of it and want to work on it and make it look better, you know, you're missing something with that first one. It should be safe, and I would suggest a larger, heavier car that would be safe in collisions. And of course, make sure that all of the equipment are good, the brakes, the lights, and everything like that. And costs enter into it also. The initial cost should be affordable. And I think this type of car that we're going to see here later will be. You want to be able to afford it initially, and the upkeep shouldn't be that bad. Repair costs, try to get a car simple enough that they won't be too high, and also the usual gasoline costs and everything. That's a very definitely something to consider. I think if I were going to warn you about one big thing, it would be to tell you to stay away from a modified car. And by that I mean some other teen's car where they've changed engines, transmissions, everything in it. Because those sometimes are just nightmares of mismatch. And if you pay a lot of money because it looks great, you're going to end up paying more money yet and probably never having a good, safe vehicle.
Now, Lucille, this is a mighty pretty car you got picked out for us today. You have selected this particular car as a good example of a car that would be good as a teen's first car. Why would something like this be a good choice?
Well, I think that fits all the criteria I've been talking about, Gary.
It is large.
I think, yeah, and heavy enough that it would be safe driving. The one thing that I would advise once you've purchased this car for your teenager is to have some rules laid down. And this comes from years of experience, not only with my own sons growing up and running lots of cars, but from always seeing what happens with cars in the shop. And that is, I would make the rule that the teenager must pay for repairs that are caused by abuse.
Okay.
Okay?
Right.
That would be...
Like tires, burn-off tires and things?
Right.
All right.
And any time that you catch him driving unsafely, garage the car. Those two things. You know, I'm really good at raising heck with teenagers in cars.
Are you?
Yeah.
You've had plenty of practice.
Right. You know, one time we had a car come into the shop that some teenager had totally destroyed. It was just unbelievable. Melted the parts in the transmission, and it was obvious what he had to have done to cause that. So when he came to pick it up, and his mother was a nurse, a widow, and she was really scraping to pay for this car repair, and I was really angry with this little animal. So what I said to him right in front of his mother when she was paying, I said, now I know how you did that, and I'm warning you right now that if you do it again, I'm not going to cover it under warranty. I said, no one should drive a car that would abuse it so badly. And the car didn't come back for repairs, and I think it sort of sunk in. But
Well, I learned my lesson. That was the first time you and I met, as I recall. Yes.
But a couple of years later, this same lady called and identified herself, that she was the one that had had the son with that car and everything. And she said, my other son is getting older now, and he's learning to drive. If I bring him in, would you give him your lecture? But right now, there's no lecture required to understand how you should negotiate the terms of a lease. It's time for another visit to our car buying consultant, Mike Solito, for today's deal of the century. We're back with our car buying consultant, Mike Solito. Mike, we're looking at this car that's advertising a smart lease. Now that must mean that there are other kinds.
There's a lot of different kinds of leases, Lucille. But I think, how do you negotiate to make sure this payment is really worth this car? Now, the way to do that is to negotiate a lease, Lucille. You have to think of the selling price first. You have to negotiate, just like if you're going to buy the car, you want to negotiate what the price of the car is up front. That's called the capitalization cost.
So if you're leasing, Mike, you still have to negotiate the sale price out front and then move on.
That's right, Lucille. Now, the more popular cars on the marketplace have things called residual values. Now, the higher that residual value, which is the resale value at the end of the lease, the lower the monthly payment is. Now, how do you know that this 268 is the best deal? Almost everybody asks that question, Lucille. It's 268 for 24 months, but it doesn't include tax. It doesn't include the security deposit that you have to put up. It doesn't include any mileage charges. So this 268 is a little deceptive.
Then what you're telling us is that there's flexibility on that lease as well.
That's right, Lucille. Most people walk into a car dealer and think that when you lease a car, there's no flexibility at all, that this is just a payment. But there's a lot of flexibility. You've got to know exactly how much the car costs to get you the best deal.
Okay, then I think you've prepared us well. Thank you.
Stay with us. There's more on the Car Care Clinic after this.
Cadillac, Lincoln Continental, Mustang, and Corvette. These cars flash through a person's mind with ease once the name is heard. They're the winners in the high-stakes name game.
Product name is extremely important because, in a sense, it gives the brand a personality. It gives them an image that consumers can really understand what this product is all about. So what you want to do with automobiles a lot of times is name it according to what it does. Escort, Caravan, Explorer, which creates particular images of what that car is attempting to do.
Audrey Guskey is a marketing professor at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. She says that although a name won't make or break a product, the right name can be a big boost. And that's why companies spare no expense in the hunt for a winner.
There are companies out there that their sole purpose is to give names for cars, and that's all they simply do is create these names. And a lot of times the product names are just generated by computers. They put a bunch of letters together and then they test those particular names. So the first thing is to generate thousands of names for particular cars, and then once they've generated them, they do a lot of consumer testing. They do consumer focus groups and they ask consumers, what image do you have by this name? What images are conjured up in your mind?
Like fashion, names are trendy, always changing with the times. But car makers are always looking for a name that will go the distance. The next Cadillac, one that will be around forever.
A good example is the Millennium just came along, and a lot of other car manufacturers were interested in using that name since we're looking at the turn of the century, and it was a great name, but it was gobbled up very quickly, and it seems like it will be a real successful name because it's suggesting trends of the future, the car of the future.
Like in any business, there are hits and misses. Here are a few car names that have succeeded for all the wrong reasons.
The classic is the Edsel, and unfortunately that was a big failure for Ford. They seemed to do everything wrong very well. In naming the product, they named it after Henry Ford's son, Edsel, his only son. They had tried out a lot of different names for the car, and they had come to 10 different choices of different names. They decided against all of them because they didn't seem to be quite what they wanted, and they thought Edsel would be a good name. Originally they called it the E-car, and then Edsel just fit in.
According to Guskey, naming a car after a living person is always a risky proposition. John DeLorean's sports car, for example. He was caught on videotape in a drug sting operation shortly before his car company failed.
The problem with the car is that the image of the owner, the manufacturer, the creator of the car, tended to be somewhat tarnished because of a lot of the bad publicity he was getting. So as a result, the car tended to be unsuccessful. And I have recently done some research on the name of the DeLorean, and still consumers are a little concerned about the car because of the image.
So what can we expect for the future? Guskey predicts that the cars we buy into the next century will have names with one thing in common.
Where now it's more esoteric or aesthetically named. When you think of Corolla or Camry, you know, the names just sort of flow off the tongue. So they're looking for names that are more musical and rhythmic and in a sense more abstract. And a lot of times you don't exactly understand what the image is, but it's creating this aura of a mystique of a car.
Well, I guess after hearing that report, I can give up the hope of ever seeing a Chevrolet Lucille in the future. That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. And remember, don't go out on the road without stopping by the Car Care Clinic first.